Hi, everybody. In this episode, we got the pleasure of talking to Clint, Diana, and Laurenz. We're mainly going to be talking about being a student, being a teacher, kind of people's opinions and perspectives on art education and their own individual journeys and kind of how they ended up where they are. So, I guess first off, we should probably introduce our speakers. If anybody wants to jump in and, just kind of explain roughly who you are, what you do, maybe where we can find your work or your classes if you're teaching or you've got a portfolio, that'd be great.
My name is Clint Cearley. I've been a full-time illustrator for over the last 10 or 12 years. I've done over 100 projects with Wizard of the Coast, on Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons. Recently spent some time as a senior art supervisor over at Blizzard working on Hearthstone. And right now I'm focusing on doing some teaching through Diane and I started Swatches Academy at swatchesacademy.com, where we're offering 8-week online classes out there. And focusing on that and doing a little freelance on the side right now.
Awesome.
Should I go? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Diana Cearley. So I was also a professional concept artist and illustrator for several years before I began teaching at Sin Studio Art School in Montreal. I was also the director of studies there for several years, where I oversaw basically all of the classes and the diploma program. So I've been focusing on education for, I'd say, at least the last 5 years. And I'm still moving in that direction now at Swatches Academy with Clint, where I am also teaching classes online and also building Swatches Studio. So this is a new project that's coming up, which will be like our own art studio focusing on illustration, a little bit of concept art, but mostly illustration. And so we're gearing up for that, probably going to launch that around next year. That's what we do.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Lots of new stuff being started up for the sounds of it then. And what about you, Laurenz? Like, whereabouts would you say you are?
So my name is Laurenz Bauer, and I'm a concept art student. I'm focusing on props and architecture design. I have spent the last 3 years learning about concept art. I started out teaching a bit by myself. Then I applied at Sin Studio for the diploma program and noticed I still have a long way to go. Then I started to take online courses and I got into also learning a lot with communities. So I started to get on Discord servers, really using the full spectrum of social media to teach myself. And then I applied to the diploma program again and I got accepted. And I went through the application process with Diana via the interview, and Clint reviewed my portfolio itself. And I'm starting at the diploma program in approximately a month in Montreal at Sin Studio.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
that's really exciting. That's so cool. But it sounds like you've, had a lot of experience with different avenues of, trying to get that art education for yourself as well. So that's going to be really interesting to kind of get stuck into. I guess I had one quick question I kind of want to ask as well, because we've obviously designed this interview so it's kind of set up that there's like a teacher or teacher's opinion and sort of a student or student's opinion. But it kind of just popped in my head just before we started talking. It'd be really interesting, and maybe I'll start with you, Diana. Do you still see yourself as a student at all, or a teacher or a professional? And do you feel like you're wearing all of those hats, or is there more of a weighting towards one? Just kind of like, where would you see yourself mainly at the moment?
Clint and I were having a conversation about some of this stuff yesterday, and it's amazing how, because of the type of industry that we're in and digital art, this kind of entertainment being so new, relatively speaking, like it hasn't been around that long. There's a lot of the stuff that we're going through and trying to develop for classes and things that students are going through when they're looking for that education that's still kind of poorly defined, some information hard to find. Even for us developing material, like there's not a lot of books to refer to for specific things, or even other teachers that are addressing certain things. So it is very much still a new thing that we're developing. So we're learning all the time, because we are from a generation where there was no YouTube really to learn art. There were no schools, online schools. I mean, I think when I got out of college, schoolism was around, but there wasn't much really on there, and it didn't really address certain things that I wanted, that I was looking for in education. So a lot of this stuff is now there's several things, there's several places you can go to, but there's still a lot of exercises and materials and technique that has not been developed because people just haven't addressed certain questions on method and technique for specifically for digital art, for concept art, for illustration. There's a lot of focus on teaching theory, or just watch what I do and do it the way I'm doing, which isn't necessarily like a standardized method. So when we're developing our classes, and this is kind of part of the reason we started working together and separately from any other schools or institutions, is because we wanted to develop all new things that actually help the students get the results that they're looking for and be able to replicate that over and over and standardize it. And we're finding that we're having to develop a lot of that stuff from scratch because it just doesn't exist. Like those types of exercises and methods and steps just don't exist in other schools and other material. So to answer your question, like I'm at a level now skill-wise where like I can put out professional work. Not all, not every job is for me. Some are not for me. Like I don't do mechs. I don't really do a lot of environments or things like that. But within characters and prop and illustration, I can do those things at a fairly professional level that I'm happy with. But there's still so much to learn. Like the whole topic is enormous. Yeah. I don't know everything. I freely and openly confess that I know nothing about stylization. I know some of the theory behind it, but I've never really explored that in practice for myself. So there are always limits to what you know, and you should always be trying to improve and expand on that, right? Like, or you could not, you could just focus on what you like and what you know and just do that. But I'm a curious person. I'm interested in other things, and that's a big part of the reason why I'm teaching, is to try and develop the things that I was looking for that were just not accessible or non-existent in our time. Because I went to college, Clint didn't, but it doesn't really matter. We ended up being kind of self-taught because I didn't learn what I wanted to learn from college. So in the end, like now we're looking around and seeing, okay, what did we learn? What is being taught to people right now? And there's still gaps. There's still a huge disconnect we find, especially between the way things are being done in the East and in the West. Very, very different kind of training methods. So this is something that we're exploring right now. So yeah, I'm still doing everything. Like I'm still learning while I'm teaching and working on my own personal professional skills. That it's kind of a little bit of everything. You never really stop if you are, a curious person.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a very sad and rare day for, I think, when someone's like, I've completed art. It's done. But I guess just to kind of like try and summarize what I kind of got from that and see if, that is how you feel. It sounds like, at least on the technical art side, you feel like maybe a bit less of a student now, more in that like professional realm. But as far as being a teacher goes, you still feel very much like there's enough for you to still learn and find out, or it's such a poorly mapped road that, you still get that feeling of learning and being a student for terms of like improving as a teacher. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah, well, I mean, even the way we were taught, or the way we learned for ourselves and the way people are being taught now, there's still a lot of relying on kind of this intuitive sense of what looks right, what doesn't look right. And people can tell you, here's the theory, here's the rule of thirds, here's whatever, big, medium, small, but it's still largely intuitive, right? And that's very hard to teach someone.
Yes.
right? So what we're trying to do now, the part that we are learning is, how do I stop trying to teach this like into artistic intuition, which it comes over time. You can't just teach that. How do we break this down in a methodical way, this process in which someone can learn without that intuition, without just having to know what looks right and what doesn't? So that's what we're learning in terms of, we're learning a lot in breaking down even what we're doing and what's the best way to take what we know and dissect it in a way that a person can understand and replicate.
Oh, that's so interesting. So yeah, it's just that like deeper level of analysis on that point when your brain would say, you know, it's mileage. It's like, what does mileage actually mean, kind of thing. Yeah. And I mean, would you say you're in a similar position then, Clint, or do you have like a slightly different view of where you are on that like spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's very similar. I feel like when you're a student, I'm thinking back when I was really putting in the hours, trying to learn enough to get to a professional level, that you're really going fast, you're going hard, you're trying to learn as much as possible because you want to get to that level where you can do this professionally. And once I got to that level, I mean, I did slow down just because, like, at least in my case, I had put in a lot of hours to get there. And so I backed off a little bit on like the learning side and teaching at that time. But then you still want to get better, and you're still curious. So you go out there and you start learning more. And it's great when you can get to where you can, you know, pay the bills doing it professionally, because there's a certain pressure that comes off of you. And so, you know, are you a pro? Yeah, at that point, you're a pro. That's what you're doing for your profession. But you are also knowledgeable enough to know that you don't know that much. so you keep wanting to learn. And one of the dynamics that I've followed for years is teaching and learning being a combination, where I want to get better at my understanding of color. Okay, so I'll go spend 2 months studying color, watching videos, looking at books, reading tutorials, experimenting with stuff, and then I'll write an ebook that is the culmination of everything that I've learned about color. And so me being able to teach is one of the ways that it forces me to learn things even more. And it's one of the best ways to learn something. So for me, that's one of the combinations. I think that like every artist will be a lifelong student, but at the same time, I love teaching. We both love teaching. It's just something that we find enjoyable. We like working with the students. We like seeing people improve and reach these goals. But it's also great that you can, you know, do it for a living as well. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's also really useful. It's something I've only recently started considering myself, as well as kind of that sentiment you're going about, like, you get the job or you are a professional, but then, you know, you've got the job. Now what? There's still decades, hopefully, of your life to fill with, you know, challenges or learning. You know, even like, can you maintain that pace, or how is it going? So it's nice to kind of get a sense of that balance for you. And then, say with you, Laurenz, like, obviously that like teacher, student, professional thing. Do you still view yourself as like maybe a teacher to like less experienced students? Like, is there ever a time where you feel like you take on that role, or like how close do you feel like you're moving towards a professional level, or, you know, just where do you place yourself on that, basically?
So yeah, for me, I'm definitely viewing myself as like 90% student. But what I do is, now that I've reached a point where I have some basic understanding of all the fundamentals, I really enjoy helping out like people that have just started out, because since I learn a lot via social media, I've joined multiple art Discord servers. I always see people posting, can you give me feedback on this? Can you give me feedback on that? And it really kind of elevates yourself if you try to help out other people, because you need to really ask yourself like questions about these things. And asking all these questions makes you notice like also what kind of mistakes you have made, and this gives you a lot of awareness on where to improve, what to do better. And also it's just a lot of fun for me. I really enjoy it, and I can see myself teaching in the future for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think that kind of echoes, you know, what Diana and Clint were saying as well, where it's like, it's one thing to learn it, but then when you're having to teach, it's that thing where you turn it into an ebook, or you don't just say it's mileage. You actually have to think about what that means. Or as you're saying, when you want to give feedback, it's like, oh, I can't just paint over their work only. I also have to put it into words, what maybe they should try and do for themselves. And that's really hard. So yeah, it's great. It sounds like you're helping people along their way, because it sounds like, you know, that's important for your own personal development as well, listening to Clint and Diana.
Yeah, super important.
So I guess just moving on from that, how would you go about kind of describing your own art journey then, Clint?
Well, my education journey started with traditional art, just working with pencils, and eventually found books. Books is really where it started, because there really wasn't the internet for art, and I wasn't going to go to any art school in my town. That wasn't an option. So yeah, just loads of art books, dozens of them, and just reading through those and learning what I can, and drawing for hours every day. Learn, you know, oil painting and soft pastels and watercolor and pen and ink, and worked with all that stuff. I was about 20 before I actually got into digital painting and got a stylus and started learning that. So I had already built up a lot of the foundation of understanding the, you know, fundamentals of art through traditional. But then I was trying to kind of channel that into digital art. And that's where I think both of us were just scouring to try to find any kind of digital training. And back then, about the only thing that was available was that I found was like Massive Black. Some of those guys back then, Jason Chan, I think I had like one video by him, and a few things like that. And of course, everybody was familiar with Craig Mullins, but nobody knew how he worked his magic. And so just over the years, teaching yourself Photoshop and trying to work it out for yourself. Over the years, I've taken a couple of workshops here and there, and I worked with a professional portrait artist doing traditional drawings, and he taught me some of those things, but never did do a proper art school, university, or those options. Diana, you're similar in some of it, but
well, I have like, okay, in my day, because I spent most of my childhood, teenage years over here in Portugal, where there was nothing. To some degree, there still isn't a whole lot for this particular area. Like, it's just not, there's no art, or there's no video game or film industry really to speak of here. And so there's no need for this type of training, these type of programs. They just don't exist. So when I was young, I was like most people who grow up and do this, is, you know, you just draw pictures. And I love drawing. I was drawing all the time on my dad's computer paper with pencils, and I would just draw lots of pictures. And I wanted to do it as a career, but it really wasn't doable here. So after I went to art school for a short time, I dropped out because I just didn't see any future in fine art, and it wasn't really what I wanted to do. But I just didn't know enough being from here. I didn't know that there was digital art was like a profession someone could have, or entertainment art was a profession someone could have. I knew nothing about that. So I ended up, for the better part of my 20s, just working regular jobs. Like I didn't know, and I just drew as a hobby because I didn't know any better. I had no notion of what a Wacom tablet was. I didn't see one or handle one until I was already 28, maybe. So I was pretty late. I had only done traditional art up until then. And then I went to a college for digital media in Canada. But again, it was just what was available to me. Going somewhere like Art Center or Nomon was never an option for me. You know, my parents were not wealthy. There was no way I could afford to do that. So I had to, I just didn't know where I should go to learn to illustrate or make entertainment art. So I just went to this school because it was nearby where I was living at the time. And I went there and I didn't really learn how to do what I wanted to do. But what it did show me was just exposed me to what was out there. Like, okay, here's our station didn't exist, but here's, conceptart.org. Here's, all these different artists that are doing this stuff. Here's what Mondo posters look like if you're interested in poster art. Here's, what the guys at Bungie are doing. And I was just, my mind is blown, right? I had no notion of this. And I thought, okay, I want to do fantasy illustration. That's what I really liked. And so I just started focusing all my attention, but I did it largely by myself. Like after I graduated, I learned nothing in college that really took me in that direction. And I went, like many people do now, all over online. I think schoolism existed at the time, so I popped in there. I went to a lecture. I saw Craig Mullin's paint, and I had no idea what I was even looking at the time. He painted like this whole complicated scene in like an hour, and I had no idea what I was watching. And I was looking for advice of where do I go? What do I do? How do I get good, right? And like, what study should I be doing? And I was just like those people, what brushes do you use? Like I had no notion of anything. And then someone said, do master studies. And I was like, okay. So then my goal began trying to achieve a traditional look in Photoshop, like trying to make a painting that looked like a real painting in Photoshop. So I focused in that direction. I did some master studies, and then I thought, I want to be more inventive, but I don't know how to do that. So then I found a mentorship. Like that was really a huge turning point for me. And I mentored with Peter Moorbacher for, I don't know, it was about 10 weeks, I think, maybe 12, I'm not sure. And that was a major turning point where he basically just gave me the confidence to even attempt making certain pictures, bigger pictures, and showed me a little bit of technique, and really just held me accountable. I finished a lot of paintings with him quickly because he was keeping me on a schedule. I didn't get distracted or bogged down with side things or trying to do styles that weren't my own and all this other stuff. So I built a portfolio really with Pete, and some of my most popular pieces to this day were pieces I made during that mentorship or shortly after, because of him. So that was the big moment, but I didn't stop learning after that. It's just that in terms of really education, structured education, that was the last kind of part of my journey. And then it was, just solo learning more as I went.
Yeah, great. That's really interesting. And it's nice I think it would be useful for a lot of people here as well, just how winding that path can be as well. It's not just like you pick an option at the beginning and it works out great and you're done. And you get squished through into employment straight afterwards kind of thing. So
I was just going to say that I think it's important to, for a student to be aware that it's okay if your interests change over the years as you're learning. And while it's really good to have an idea, okay, you're trying to go to illustration, or you're trying to go to concept art, or you're trying to go to comic books, right? Because those require different skill sets. And so let's be learning what we need to head in that direction. But if you mature, your interests are going to change. And the more that you learn about something, your interests may change. You might find that it's not quite what you thought it would be, or you learn about something else that, frankly, is just far more interesting to you. And be open to adjusting your course over time. And don't feel like just because you started with one goal that necessarily has to be the one thing that you always do. But you have to balance that against, of course, like being wishy-washy and change your mind every week. That's not going to get anywhere if you do that. But we're talking about, over the course of several years, if you shift and go, frankly, I find environments far more interesting than the characters. I started characters first, but I love the environments. Great, move to environments. There's no issue with that. And frankly, it's part of the overall learning and maturity process of being an artist.
Yeah, maybe so squirm in my chair a little bit. We were talking about flipping and flopping between a lot of different interests. I feel like I have a very short attention span. And it was even funnier when it was be that shift from characters to environments, because I think that's kind of the shift that made me focus a little bit more, where I was like, I'm trying to force myself to learn something that I decided I liked, and then was being too rigid on just like, oh, I've got to fix my problems at doing this. And it wasn't just, I might actually be more interested in a different subject entirely. Interestingly, in your last answer, I think you kind of answered two of our follow-up questions quite neatly in that as well. We're going to ask both of you if, you know, there was a particular mentor or teacher that maybe you had who stood out, and, you know, maybe there's some like thanks or something about their experience that you wanted to go. It was very interesting to hear that you
I would gladly say thank you to Pete. I haven't spoken to him since then. There was really just no reason for us to talk in this since then, but, you know, and he's always really busy nowadays. But yeah, I do feel like the biggest thing that I took away from that was that really I guess I already had some of the skills. I just needed someone to give me permission to do it and not feel like I was in over my head or like I was a fraud. And Pete just gave me that confidence. So, you know, I think without him, it would have taken me at least another year to get professional work. So he helped me a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. It was a big turning point for me, massive. Like I think he helped me more. He helped me more than college. Like if I had known, I would have gone to see Pete 2 years before, and I would have been, you know, working earlier than wasting my time at college and
save some dough right there.
Saved a bunch of money,
Yeah, on my side, I mean, the first influence, and it has been for my whole life, honestly, is my mom. She's creative. She's not an artist per se, but she is creative. She makes stuff. We both enjoy talking about art and that sort of thing. And it's more just that supportive presence in my life as somebody who is always willing. Hey, you want to learn, you know, oil painting? Pick out which book you want, and I'll order it for you. You need some more paints? Let's go to the art store. We'll buy it for you. And it was just very supportive about, if this is what you want to do, I'll happily help you accomplish this. And even though it wasn't necessarily her teaching me, that was a huge influence over the years of me actually seeing this thing through. The other one was when I was mid-late teens working with James Spurlock, back in Texas. He was a professional portrait artist. He's the one that really taught me a lot of the just fundamentals of how to sight size and measure things for accuracy, because we did a lot of things from life, and how to think in terms of value groups and color groups, and talking about color schemes, and, you know, this stuff that you don't pick up very well from a book. And again, he was just a supportive guy. So I would say those are the two biggest on my side.
Oh, great. Well, that was also just one of the most wholesome middle of the day thank yous I think I got. So nice to hear when someone's getting, like, you know, someone in their corner back at home, because, you know, it's a long journey normally getting to professional art, from deciding you what like paints. So that's really nice to hear that you had that behind it.
He's really wholesome overall.
No, just in general. And then I guess the other question would be like, you know, if you were back at being a student again, or, you know, or rather you can have that thing where you magically go back into your 16, 20, 24-year-old head when you're studying, like, is there a particular mistake that you'd be like, please no, not again?
Okay, so it was like, the idea is, what would you try to avoid if you went back?
Yeah, is there a mistake that you try and spare yourself from, I guess, if you could warn yourself about making it? Yeah. What's the key one?
For me, I did take a job as a graphic designer for graphic design almost full time for about 8 years, from age 19 till about 27. And if I could go back, I think I would have told myself, you shouldn't have done it that long. I just got to the point where I was really burned out, and I ended up kind of detesting it and didn't touch it for years and years. Like, I didn't even want to lay out any of my own stuff. And so I think it's just going back and saying, it's fine to do that. It's fine to have a job and be doing art on the side. But at some point, you got to pull the trigger and you got to actually try this thing. And I wish I would have done it earlier. I wish I would have spent a couple of years doing graphic design, and that's fine. That's literally where I learned Photoshop and InDesign and these other programs. And it's where I learned about printing and websites and how to build this stuff. I had to learn it for the job. But I also should have just built a portfolio and tried to start getting some work earlier and saved myself some time, and I would have been years ahead of where I am now. I don't know that I really could have changed that much as far as my education, because there was only certain options years ago. So I guess at that point it'd be about like 15 years ago. So I don't know that I could have done too much differently there. What about you, Diana?
I think I wasted a lot of time, and I think a lot of students do this with like the style thing. And it's like a certain period of experimentation for everybody where you kind of don't really know what you want to do. So you just start doing a little bit of everything and see if something like sticks, right? But knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have even bothered with that. Like, there's no way I would ever draw cartoons. Like, it's just one of those things. There was no point in even attempting that. Trying to do cutesy stuff, it's not my bag. There were just certain things that I wasted time on. And then I focused a lot of time on certain types of images. Going back now, I would have been a little bit more varied in my approaches. I would have spent more time on materials for sure earlier instead of leaving it for later. But everyone kind of prioritizes different things. Like I was really prioritizing my drawing and my compositions, and I wasn't thinking too much about colors or materials early on. And that's something I really should have thought more about. But I mean, it's like Clint was saying, there was just not a whole lot available to us. Like we just didn't know better. Right?
Yeah, you know the disease, but you're like, where's my medicine?
If I could go back, like if I could go back and teach myself, then I guess one of the things that I could have done to save myself struggle and time would have been to learn certain things in a different order. That I quickly jumped to trying to do these big complex scenes because I was like, that's what I see the professionals doing. They're doing these big epic scenes. And honestly, it was just beyond my ability level at that time. And it was significantly beyond my ability level, which meant that I really wasn't improving by trying to do it. It's like somebody, first lesson of ice skating, and you try to go out and do a double Lutz. Well, you're going to just be wasting your time. Like, you're not really going to be improving because it's so far beyond your skill level that it's just better if you had tried something more doable on a little smaller scale and learn to do that well first. And again,
these are principles. These are things we teach our students now, which is, hey, don't try to do the forest if you can't do the tree. Just focus on the tree first, right? Yeah. Because everybody suffers from this, and we did too, where we were like looking at all this art from the professionals, which a lot of times we didn't even know how it was being made. Like, it didn't occur to me as a student that a lot of that stuff was photo textures, was 3D. A lot of newbies think everybody's hand painting all this stuff. there's like two mistakes, right? Either they think everything is hand done, or they think everything is computer generated and nothing's hand done. It's like, you know what I mean? So you don't, as a newbie, you don't really know, and you think, oh, I must paint manually like what, you know, that artist is doing, not knowing that that's not even possible. And you start trying to make, and we see this a lot with students, trying to do these epic, like Magic the Gathering style scenes, it's epic concept art. And it's like, if you ask them just to do the one object, they struggle just with that. You have to scale back to get really solid with manageable things before you like escalate the difficulty, right?
And the great thing about that is, if I had done that, and if I had pared down from these big complex scenes to simpler stuff, I could have started getting work a lot sooner.
That's what
and I could have built up more experience, money, and credentials earlier. Instead, I just kind of landed into doing some complex stuff for Magic. And honestly, I didn't have a good workflow. I was able to do it out of like pure full stubbornness. Like, I'm just not going to quit until it looks good. But I'm struggling hard on every single piece because I didn't have a consistent workflow. And yeah, I think I would have liked to save myself some of that trouble.
Yeah, I'm sure like a lot of people see themselves in that. I'd be like, I did my 5-year stint as a graphic designer as well. And this was the year I decided, like 5 is definitely too big a number now. I can't put it up any longer. So yeah, that was very nice for me to hear.
Time to move on, Adam.
Yeah, exactly. I guess kind of like a counter to that as well then would be like, is there anything you notice in students that you have nowadays, like students who are doing particularly well, or you know, seem to have good class habits? Have you noticed any traits that they share?
Yes. So we've noticed that students who do the homework every week tend to be more successful. Students that implement feedback tend to be more successful. So students that come to class tend to be more successful. So it really is one of those things where you get out of it what you put into it. And a person that doesn't put effort into the classes probably won't put effort in on the job. It's just, you know, goes kind of without saying. It should be logical. So we've noticed that engagement, participation, work ethic is a big part of it. And students that really want to succeed, like, you actually have to really want it. I think some people come into it to just kind of try it out, see how it feels, if it's for them. But, you know, people that are treating it seriously, like serious training, are the ones that are going to make it. Like we were talking about this recently, that there's a distinction, whether people like it or not, between a hobbyist and a professional. Right. And I think a lot of the students don't quite understand the difference. There's a lot of people are still making art for pleasure, for themselves, for like some emotional connection they get when they're doing it. It's not to say that we don't enjoy doing professional work, but it's a different mentality. Like, we're not doing it for personal fulfillment, right? We're doing it because it's our profession. And we have the skills to do this. So, you know, obviously we're happy when it comes out good, right? When we meet the client's expectation, we do well, but we don't do the activity for pleasure, for enjoyment. So a student that has that kind of professional approach will, in our experience, be more successful than a person who's just only draws when they're inspired, only comes to class when they feel like it, only does the assignment when they're interested in the assignment. So those people are going to have a much harder time making it, because you do have to be consistent and take it seriously. So the students that do that, who really care about what they're doing, who put in the best of their effort every assignment, doing it to the best of their ability. Because a lot of times, you know, someone will show me homework and that's not even their best effort. It was literally like the fastest thing they could do the day before. You know, how are you going to push yourself if you're not pushing yourself? a teacher cannot do that for you. So yeah, I mean, I hope that answers it.
Yeah, a couple of notes on my side. Those are all true, what she said, and it's things that we talk about, and we try to address them and figure out ways to deal with it with our own students. But it is a lack of understanding of what is the responsibility of the student and how to be a good student. And it doesn't matter the quality of the teacher if the student is not a good quality student. And there's a phrase of a financial guy, Dave Ramsey, and he talks about if you're trying to take your hobby to being your job, that always remember that if you treat something like a hobby, it will pay you like a hobby. If you treat something like a job, it will pay you like a job. If you come into art class and you treat it like a hobby, like she's saying, you do it when you feel like doing it, and you just do the parts that seem enjoyable to you, then it'll pay you like that. Hobbies don't pay you. They take your money. They don't give you money, right? I think the other one connected to that is the idea that if you watch a video or if you read a book, that you learned it. And that's just not true. Like, if that's the case, then I'll just turn on, karate videos, and I'll just watch the karate videos and say that I learned karate. But that's not the way it works unless you're actually doing it. Unless, you're practicing those kicks, you're not improving your karate. In the same way, if your pencil is not moving and you're not making marks, you haven't actually learned anything yet. And what we have is a very kind of consumer-based student that is used to just feeding information in, but not having to put it into action.
The output.
Yeah. And I would pit the untalented art student who will consistently do all the homework they're asked to do, and he will succeed over the talented student who only does the homework that he feels like doing, or who just doesn't do the homework and watches all the videos.
Yeah. And by talented, we're not talking about magical powers or whatever. We're talking about aptitude, right?
Natural aptitude.
There are people that have a natural aptitude, and from my experience, what that really means, all it means is that they can advance a bit faster.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that, if you don't have any aptitude, you can't advance at all. It's not like that. It's just they have an advantage, but if they don't put in the work, they're not going to learn anything just by having an advantage, right? You still have to put in the work to learn the things and do them. And the output is a big part of it. Like, think about it like this. If a student takes in all this information but doesn't produce anything, what's it all for? What's it good for? Nothing's happening up here unless it comes out. I know that the people listening to this can't see my hand movements, but if it stays in your head and it doesn't come out through your pencil, your stylus, then what good is it to anyone?
The word that kept coming up over and over then hearing you talk was just this word about consistency and kind of students being able to kind of level their output where, whether they're feeling inspired or just in love with art today, or whether, it's rainy outside and they have a sore back or they're upset a little bit, they can still turn up and deliver a level of work. And that seems to be, more important than, I have the ability to rotate objects in my head really easily, as opposed to a student who might really struggle to imagine things anyway. In the not so long run, that consistent and deliberate practice seems to pay out more than having some more intrinsic abilities towards making images.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing the world needs is more idea people. We don't need any more. There's lots of people with ideas and just say, I could do that if I wanted to. Well, then just do it, right? Like, if people don't actually make the work, anyone can say anything, right? Anyone can say, I could do this and that. And it's not valuable if you can't actually turn it into something substantial.
Do you guys have any goals of where you're going and say like a teacher? I mean, at the beginning of the call, you were talking about some new projects that you were starting, but do you guys have like a plan, say in the same way, a student has a dream studio or a dream job or occupation? Have you guys kind of got like a vision of where you want your like teaching practice to go?
Oh, yeah, we're constantly talking about different goals that we want to aim towards. And right now, we're just wanting to really ramp up Swatch's Academy and get that to be a regular name for digital art education, and wanting to offer a wider range of classes. Right now, we're just having 5 classes over character design, character portraits, environment diorama, painting with AI, and material rendering. But there's loads of other subjects that we are interested in, that we want to teach. So just over the course of the different terms and years, we want to start teaching more subjects. And we may even start doing some full-time, I'll say full-time, but ongoing mentorships, possibly. That's an option, but the classes are really great. And different events, we want to be able to do contests and art challenges and be able to work with the community, in some of those regards. We also talked about doing, possibly publishing some of our teaching material into proper, books, and that can be really handy. I'd love to be able to have a compilation of all of these different examples. We're creating loads and loads of examples for all the classes of all the techniques and different demonstrations, and compiling those into a proper manual, you could go along with and learn these things. As far as the teaching side, yeah, that's kind of what I have in mind for right now. Maybe as we keep going, we'll come up with some more goals. But then we've also been playing around with the idea of moving forwards with Swatch Studio. You can tell me more about this idea.
Yeah, so the idea was, aside from teaching, like we'll never be teaching too many, live classes so that we're doing it every day. Like we always leave gaps for ourselves. And the idea was to keep picking up some freelance here and there, some jobs. And then we thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could take some of the students that are high performers, that are doing really well, that are ready for a gig and just need maybe a little help or a little guidance, and have sort of an internship, mentorship, intermediate program where we could kind of bring those people that are ready or very close to ready, bring them onto a client project and kind of art direct them and train them on how to handle the job, how to handle the brief for, specific pieces, like just a character standalone piece or just a prop piece, and kind of help them through it so that then they can have that professional experience, they can have that on their resume as a job credit, and then, they could stay with studio or they could go off on their own after that and do their own thing. But just kind of being able to provide a bridge for some of our students to go from student to professional and kind of help them transition. Because we know that there's loads of work out there for this type of stuff, props, characters, little bits of environments and different things that games need. And if, our classes, we're able to structure them in a way that produces predictable outcomes, we can then transition students into that and help them become working professionals, get some experience on the job, which is, the first one is always so hard. It's so hard for us, and it's so hard for a lot of students getting that first job and not knowing what to do. How do I handle it? And so the idea behind Studio is, it's like we don't need to do it for ourselves. Like we can find our own work. It's not really a problem. But we thought, well, it would be kind of cool to help out our students to actually get in, and then they can go do whatever they want afterwards, get their own work, or they can keep working with us possibly. And we don't really know how large we want this to get, because we can only handle so much. But that's a goal that we have, is being able to provide that, because not a lot of schools really will do that, or help a person in that little in-between stage, right after classes are over.
Yeah, I find that bridge tool would be really useful because, the second you sort of finish a class, and I've been here several times, that gap between feeling like you're really ready and you're right on the edge as you start handing in finals that you're happy with, it's the best work, you're getting good comments and feedback, and then class ends and suddenly it's an ocean in between you and the job again, and you don't have any steps. This idea of it being kind of like an environment in between school and work, just to help you deal with that part specifically, I'm sure is something that a lot of people would be interested in. In fact, I'd be quite interested if, like maybe how you feel about that, Laurenz, like this idea of kind of having a like studio for students that helps them kind of get that first placement.
I mean, that sounds absolutely amazing because as a student, I can really tell that, having something like a mentorship is so beneficial. It also has a lot of to do with the fact that you have a professional that is actually trusting you to be able to do something, because that is a huge thing. It's this motivation at the start, that especially when it comes to concept art, you have so many things you need to watch out, you need to learn at the same time, that it can be really overwhelming. And having someone there that can tell, step by step, okay, actually, this is not that bad, but you need to improve here and there, that's so helpful. And also like the guidance, because going into the professional industry is a huge struggle for everyone, because like no matter who you ask, people will tell you, that you start out really clueless. Just having someone help you out for that leap, it sounds amazing, and I would definitely want to join something like that if I had the opportunity. It sounds also really fun.
Yeah, because I would agree there does seem to, at least to my perspective on it, it does seem to be quite a large like distinction between your time as a student and your time as someone searching for work. Like they're two very different stages, and I think when you're learning, it's probably helpful for teachers as well to separate them to some degree, but they'll focus purely on you're an art student currently, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on with teaching. And then, as you're saying, maybe it's only when if you're lucky enough to find or get a mentorship or have someone who's a bit further down the path than you who can specifically help deal with that work side part. And they're probably not going to be talking to you much about art at that stage either, and they'll almost probably be focusing just on the career side of the job. So this blend sounds very like interesting. So it sounds like a nice space to kind of pull things together.
Yeah, in my mind, as we've discussed this idea, that it's almost equivalent to like a teaching hospital, right? Well, maybe that doesn't make sense to other people, but it's not like you just go from as a doctor, you don't go from a classroom where you're just working with paper to, okay, now you just have a patient and that's it, good luck. It's like, no, you go shadow the current doctors and you're learning on site with them with their oversight, and you're making the rounds with them, and and slowly you start getting to do more and more of the procedures with their oversight. And that's kind of what we want to do, is that it doesn't just go from you have a teacher to now you have an art director, that we'd be kind of running both a little bit, that was sort of
it would be like an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Like a professional training program where it's not a student in a classroom anymore. It's now, okay, now we've taught you all these things, these exercises, these principles, theory, whatever. Now we're going to just teach you kind of the routine, the steps of going through the job, the process, and do that a couple of times. And then, then we just push the little birdie out of the nest. Now go and fly by yourself. But it's, we had none of that. We had like no access to that. That wasn't even a thing when we were starting out. We literally were like kicked out of the nest, and then whatever happens, happens. Bad work for at least one client because of that problem, because I had no training on these particular problems that I was trying to solve. And I had basically no hand holding, no direction. And that work could have been a lot better if I had a mentor, or if I was, kind of shadowing or apprenticing with someone. So this is something that we talked about, and we thought, like, so many people I think would benefit from this. Like we really wanted it and it just didn't exist. And it's like we have the contacts, we have the network that a lot of the students don't have. And why not use that to help them just get their foot in the door, which is the hardest part. Because there's only so much of it that we can do for ourselves anyway, right? I mean, we already have enough work to do all around. So we're not afraid of sharing that with the students, as long as, again, you know, they're really motivated, they're doing really well, and they show they can handle that responsibility.
There's a distinct difference between just having art rendering skills. You can paint a scene, but then there's a whole other skill set about how do you work with a client? How do you read a brief? How do you interpret the brief? How do you relate to your art director? How do you take their feedback? How do you put together a contract? How do you invoice somebody? Like, these are things that, I mean, nobody taught me how to do this stuff. They don't teach you like the actual, I'm going to say, business side of the art career, especially as a freelancer. I mean, it's a little less if you're working as an employed, you know, in a studio. But maybe we could even touch on that sort of stuff in that scenario.
So yeah, I guess we're going to switch a little bit more to talk to you, Laurenz. But yeah, I guess just to start, I know you mentioned at the beginning, I think you said you've been studying for like roughly 3 years now. You'd say you've been a student.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it was mainly environments and props. Probably interesting for anyone who might be, you know, mirroring or wants to compare where they're going with you. Is there like is that the specialism you're kind of aiming for? Is there like a particular job within entertainment design, or like a studio or anything in particular that you've kind of got your eyes or heart set on?
Yes, there is. Like at first, thought I really wanted to do environment design, but the more I did it, the more I realized that's just way too much at once for me. I'm very good at taking a singular thing and really focusing on that, because if I do environments, I want to design like the trees itself, you know, I want to separate everything, and that's not possible. You know, you do not have the time to design every single prop in an environment usually. I mean, maybe there are cases, but mostly no. And I'm aiming to one day work at Respawn Studios, especially for Apex Legends. And what I really enjoy is drawing sci-fi, but a sci-fi that works with the idea of having a future that is not destructive, but is working with the environment, having something great. Because if I look at a lot of sci-fi games now, you see a lot of these huge buildings, very gray, dark, moody things. And I feel like there will be a little bit of a turn in this sci-fi question, you know, having like natural things with the environment. And this is like really appealing for me. And I think Respawn Studios and especially Apex Legends works in that parameter.
Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, my head, it popped into the head whenever you see like a dystopian setting and, you know, someone's campfire is covered in spikes and needles and broken glass. And it's like, I'm sure that person at least sweeps the floor of their hovel, you know, or, you know, these giant buildings that block out the sun. It's like, I'm pretty certain people will still like sunlight in the future.
Yeah.
So then I guess to like follow up now and know a little bit about where you're kind of aiming to go. It's like, because obviously you said you've been a student for 3 years, but you may have been drawing or learning a bit more. But it's like, if that's kind of the point that you decided you were a student, did that coincide with like taking a particular course, seeing something online, taking a class, and like why did you decide to kind of take that step and become a professional student, as it were?
So for me, I've been drawing ever since I could hold a pen. And when I got into high school, I got into an art school, but art school mainly focused on traditional media and art history. And I really had no idea there was even such a thing as concept art. But I always knew everyone else in my class was doing abstract stuff. They were doing realistic portraits. And I always wanted to do something that didn't exist. So after I finished school, I realized, hey, there's actually such a thing as concept art. And then there was like a very, you know, for me, it was almost like a positive thing, even though, you know, it was horrible. But for me, COVID allowed me to take online courses, because that was a huge thing for me, and then because I was, just scouring the internet for like what concept art is, I saw that there's a diploma program at Sin Studio, and I had a lot of passion but no skills at all. And I applied, and I got a little bit of a slap in the face, like a reality check. And I realized, okay, that's like a really long way to go. And for me, when it like really clicked, getting serious, is actually analytical sketching. That's where things really started to pick up and make sense. Obviously, like all the other things like character design, creature design, environment design, they were also really important. But where it really started is actually understanding like the core fundamentals of drawing itself. That's where it started to get really serious. And then also, seeing progress in yourself, that's a huge booster.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely thing about when you start tackling fundamentals as opposed to just trying to create those big portfolio art scenes at the beginning. Is the improvement is pretty small each time you tackle one giant art scene, but you can be like, oh, every rock I'm drawing is looking way better than the last rock, or it's like, this rock has good values and terrible color, but next week color's fixed now, and it's a lot more objective kind of thing going through.
It's a huge thing, because when you start out, every piece you finished, if you would do it again, it would be way better. Every single time you do something, you improve.
Yeah, like every 5 minutes after a piece is finished. So it's crazy how fast that satisfaction just disappears on any piece. It seems to be like a curse we all just gotta live with.
Yeah, but it's also like a really important thing. It's not just a curse, because that makes you want to constantly improve, and it's a drive to get better and better.
Yeah, that's such a healthy way of looking at that for sure. Understand you're about to start your diploma, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Have you had any sort of like more formal, there was quotation fingers there as well, like art education before? Like, have you attended classes or taken like a structured online course?
So I started out, when I realized I wanted to do concept art, I took the boot camp at Sin Studio, which is 5 courses for 10 weeks, each week with like homework and 1 class. And so that was really my first contact with like a bit more serious art. And after that, I started to take other courses at Sin Studio, but I took less and less, because to be fair, when you start out doing concept art and you have no idea, and you take a boot camp with 5 classes a week, it's quite tough. It's a lot at once. So I came to notice, okay, maybe it's better to slow down and really take your time, because when I had my mentorship with Christian Robert de Mussy, he told me the importance of being obsessive about making everything perfect, because that's how you really improve. It's not doing like 50 sketches a day, which are all like crappy and have a lot of mistakes. No, it's about having like this one piece that is purely correct, and then moving on to the next one and trying to make that piece 100% correct again.
Yeah, so deliberate, targeted kind of improvement rather than just pure mileage. Yeah, it's kind of that thing when you hear someone say mileage, you're always worried someone's going to fall in the trap of, okay, if I just draw 1,000 rocks, the 1,000th rock will be 1,000 times better than the first one, where it's like, no, you could probably draw like 9 really, really good rocks and be there. You can spend more, closer to spending more hours on one rock deliberately rather than like thousands of bad rocks.
And I took a total of 12 classes with Sin Studio, which is quite a lot, but I gotta mention that I'm a person that is not just able to sit down and work by themselves. I really strive when I have other people around and I get like someone tells me what to do, That's also why I feel like I would belong very well in like the concept art industry that works at a studio with other people, because then someone will come to me and give me like some work to do, and I can just focus on doing it and not making myself my own plan. Discipline is a huge thing, right? And a lot of people aren't really honest enough with themselves to say that, but for I'd say like almost all students, discipline is even like the biggest challenge.
Yeah, no, I'd say I can relate to that completely. I'd say even aside from picking the right course and kind of getting a better like workflow with my self practice, one of the best things that happened to me was say actually going to an in-person school, which not everyone can do. But even when I was taking online classes, just meeting other students who were really trying and having that pressure, not only that you're setting on yourself, that discipline that you're saying is very important, but also you make friends, you meet people who you compete against, and it's really interesting that you don't just get your discipline, you kind of get to tap into their discipline as well. Like you want to keep up with that person who you're competing with, or you don't want to let down your friend. And as you're saying, I think you also mentioned, you really enjoy being a bit more engaged in socials and kind of meeting these people and helping people who are like a little bit behind you and reaching out to people who are a bit further ahead of you, to just like keep that discipline really high. So, if you're feeling a little bit unmotivated, there's always this swarm of people around you to help keep that motivation up, because I found that improved my efficiency at learning hugely compared to when I was learning on my own.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest advantage we have in the digital age is that you are able to make a lot of friends very quickly that have the same passion, and these people will make sure you work and then you make sure their work. And it's basically like in Buddhism, you have this thing where you get to a point where you're like a Buddhist monk, you always need a brother, and that brother makes sure you stay on the path. And that's exactly the same in concept art. If you have one person that makes sure you stick on that path and he does the same thing the other way around, that's like super, super valuable.
Yeah, I love that sentiment as well. I'll be using that. I'll be telling people to go and find their brother.
Because I think it's very hard to just carry all that things on your own. I don't even know if it's possible. Maybe you have a few people that are able to just do everything by themselves. But I think that's like very small percentage of all the students.
Yeah, and I mean, sadly, obviously, we're having like a little bit of technical issue connection to that, so David's not been able to talk too much here. But I would say that was probably the most valuable, even more so than the classes that I took. We traveled to Poland, we saw a focal point school, but I met David there, and I wouldn't have even met the three of you today if I hadn't have made that connection with David. And I'm getting tons of value hearing all of these opinions, and it's also just enjoyable to talk to people, about something that we all enjoy doing. So, yeah, I would say you're completely echo your sentiment, and hopefully this interview as well can be a little bit of an advertisement for how important it is to talk to those people you're studying with, make those connections, because it makes the struggle a little less hard.
Yeah, and also like thinking about, if you need to sit down every single day to draw, it might be a little bit daunting, because at some point you will feel like, I don't feel like drawing today, I feel so tired. But when you jump onto a Discord server and you just talk to someone and they draw, you immediately start to draw too, and then it gets more of like a fun thing instead of just a training thing. Because, if you're a professional, it's different. Because if you're a professional, you need to do the work, you need to deliver every single day, no matter if you feel bad or not, But as a student, you don't really have that pressure, there's not really anyone like completely kicking your ass to do things. It's different maybe if you're at a university, because you get grades and it's just a little bit of a different thing. But if you're just starting out, it's so good to have someone else.
Yeah, I agree. It's harder to see that homework turning into like food when you're a student, as opposed to when you've got a wage coming in.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess contrary to that, it was nice to hear some like the positives that you picked up from kind of having this formal class structure. I'd say like, what would you say was kind of like sort of like one of the bigger challenges of the class that you took, whether it's because it's an online format, or maybe the workload was hard, or just connecting with people? Like, was there a particular thing that was surprisingly hard?
Yes,
in your class?
There was definitely, and it was keeping up to like what the class offers and everybody else, because at first you compare yourself way too much, and you always see these one or two people in the class that are like miles beyond your skill level, and obviously you compare yourself to them, and that's like not a healthy way of looking at it. And also, I had times where I didn't finish homework and I felt so bad about it. And I even didn't want to submit the homework, but that's like the worst thing you could do, because teachers understand that, sometimes there are things that are way more challenging and it just requires a lot more time. And, there's also a point where you use up all your energy and you're just having a very hard time keeping, up all that work. So that was a huge challenge, but, I realized, it's about the consistency. It's about, even if you don't finish it, still showing other people what you did, because you can still learn a lot from, even if you've done like maybe just 50% of the homework. That's enough for a teacher to tell you, okay, I already see where your mistakes are. That's where you can improve.
Yeah, that sounds like pretty sage advice to me. But I guess following on to that as well, like, do you sort of have any like strategies, or maybe there's like a phrase you tell yourself in your head now? Because it sounds like, you've identified this problem and you're dealing with it. And I'm sure there are other people who are, struggling to hit submit on work that they're not pleased with, or maybe they don't want to show people that they're struggling, or, whatever the reason is. Like, is there anything you tell yourself or anything that you do to kind of help yourself?
Yes, there is. Anyway? And understand this is not completely possible for everybody, but it's believing in yourself. It's believing that one day you will reach your goal, and not really thinking about the things you haven't done, but thinking about the stuff you have done, because there will be times where you deliver really good work and really good homework, even for your skill level. And just realizing that you have come like a long way, and not getting stuck on just like what I delivered right now. I think that's one of the things that helped me the most. Just believing in yourself. It sounds like so easy to say, but it's so important. Also, if you ask a teacher, they will tell you probably exactly the same, that they had all these struggles, and it's just about, keeping going, keeping up momentum.
No, that matches with most of my experience, I'd say, as well. Like, we're normally, hardest on ourselves. And also, I'm not someone who normally celebrates those key stages that you hit either as well. But the advice that you gave, I said, would be great. I'm sure if you showed, a painting that you did yesterday to you from 3 years ago, they wouldn't believe that was where they're at, or it would really make them excited for those miserable days that they have in the middle. But yeah, I know it's not easy to put yourself there to do it.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, for me personally, I've thought a lot of times that I'm not doing enough work and that I should do like 20 times more, and I pressured myself so much. But if I talk to other people that maybe have a little bit of a slower art journey than me, they always mention like, oh my God, you improved so fast. Meanwhile, I was sitting there thinking to myself, fuck, I need to improve like 10 times faster. And that's such a weird thing, right? Because a lot of times you don't even notice like what you have done,
Yeah, no, it's mad because there's one point, I think, when you're starting where you're like, I just want to improve. And then when you actually are improving, you just replace that with, I just want to improve faster. And you kind of forget that you've achieved step one already, and you just don't give yourself any slack. So yeah.
Yeah, and I also feel like that when you're improving, it's not real. You don't really see all like the small steps. It's almost like a level up, right? You learn, and at some point you have a level up, and that's where you have made such a good progress that it's visible. But that can take a lot of time, and in the time between you will feel like you don't improve at all, but actually you improve constantly, but the changes just aren't big enough for you to notice. And it's also important to keep that in mind, that you don't always need to see your progression right away. It's fine to just believe that there is progression.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's going back to the confidence as well that you're talking about, which is something I think most artists definitely could do with hearing. Have a little bit of confidence in where it's going. But yeah, I guess the next question, I guess these two there's two that kind of cross over a little bit, so I'll kind of ask them together. And one would be like, as you've been searching for classes or teachers in that, is there a particular subject that you've been kind of having a really hard time finding a resource for?
To be honest, not really. but maybe that comes down to me being able to research very well. I think it's one of my strengths that, if I sit down to look for things, I will definitely end up finding it,
Yeah.
I personally also, because I like to connect so much, if I get stuck, I will just ask someone else for help.
Okay.
So,
I mean, just because I'm sure it'd be very useful for people who maybe aren't quite so good as researching as you, like, do you have any particular resources or tools for doing that research? Like, what type of things do you search, or who do you talk to kind of find those?
I think the easiest way is to look for art communities. For example, Clint has his own art community on Discord. There's Tyler Edlin, there's Trent, and these communities have skill levels from I just started to begin and I've reached professional level. And these people, they understand the struggles of getting stuck, and they will help you 100%.
Great. So yeah, another reason to go and find your brothers. All right.
And also, taking a look at what kind of concept art directions there are, and just simply, for example, let's say you really like character design, Googling character design classes and just comparing them all, and maybe not really settling on the first thing you find. That is also very helpful, because I've seen that a lot of people, they get overly excited and they maybe pick something that is not really suited for exactly what they want, and then they maybe end up having no motivation. They don't do their homework. That's just not good.
Yeah, and actually, it's a question that's kind of got a question I'd actually kind of quickly like to ask Clint or Diana based on that, because not having been on the teaching side, I'm always very curious, when people are looking at studying courses, kind of how welcome having, a prospective student ask you, like, emailing you directly or trying to get more information on the class. Is that something that you get much? Like, does that happen to you much, or like, how do you kind of approach answering those? Or is there like a more effective way, maybe, if people want to get more information on your class? Like, how would they go about it?
Well, right now, we recently put out an entire new website for our academy, which is just swatchesacademy.com. And the full information for the classes we have available is listed out there. We have a full FAQ for, common questions. And you can likely find the answer that you're looking for there on the site, but our emails are listed there as well. It's just Clint or Diana at Swatches Academy. And you're welcome to shoot us an email if you have an inquiry, or if you're unsure which class is the best suited for you. We've had several people reach out to us and just say, hey, I want to improve, but I'm not sure where I'm at skill level wise, or what I need to learn next. And we'll happily, take a look at your gallery and make a suggestion on which class would be the best suited for you. Aside from that, the most inquiries we get are about mentorships. People are looking for one-on-one, ongoing, basically personalized education and teaching. But that's not something that we're offering right now. It's very time intensive, and to do it, we'd have to charge a lot. And there's really not
to do it properly. I mean, a lot of the ways, or a lot of what you see people doing with mentorships is they'll just kind of do it on the fly. Most of the time, the student just brings their work to the mentor, and the mentor kind of critiques it, and they work on those pieces, or they create new pieces together, but there's no structured curriculum necessarily. I mean, there are some exceptions, like kind of what Adam Duff is doing on Lucid Pixel. He's got structured, material already pre-recorded for his mentorships. But for the most part, when you go to a mentorship like I did with Pete, it was kind of like, come as you are, bring your work, and we'll just sort of work on that and do the best that we can to improve your pieces together. But that's not we don't find that. We find that kind of a more advanced approach to be like, this is something we would do at Swatch's studio, right? Which is working on individual pieces for a client together. And that would be a one-on-one kind of relationship. But for a mentorship we don't find that helpful, that approach for most students. And what they really do need is a structured approach.
Like, as you're kind of studying, is there kind of this area, or is there a gap in particular that you're kind of feeling unprepared for in between, like being a student and being a professional? Like, is there an area that still kind of feels foggy or mysterious, I guess, about what you have to do to make that transition?
That's a great question. I'm honestly, I'm not so sure about that, because I understand that there are things I'm better at and that there are also things I'm worse at, but I'm trusting myself a lot that I will like learn all the gaps until I reach a professional level. And also something that is very important to understand is that as a concept artist, you never stop learning. Like, if you want to have a profession where you reach a point where if you've learned it all, you're probably wrong at concept art. As a concept artist, you need to constantly improve. Even if you're like even the best concept artists in the world will probably say that they're still learning all the time. Every day they learn something new. They are eager to get further. And I think that's really important to understand that you also don't need to close every single gap to reach a professional point. I think there are some things like perspective, composition, color that you need to like have a proper understanding, but you don't need to maximize everything, because a lot of people, a lot of professionals told me that when they went into the professional world, like that's where a lot of the learning really picked up. You start to reach a point where you are good enough that you can work out pieces completely on your own, but you will still always have someone else that will help you. I mean, maybe if you do like freelance work purely, maybe that is not as advanced, because you will maybe just get feedback once you finish the piece from the client, and then you need to work on other things. But even there's like a communication, there's a dialogue about your work.
Yeah, no, I can see kind of that. So I also kind of get this sense from your answer. Is it maybe that you're like really, it sounds like you're a bit more focused on kind of excelling at being a student necessarily at the moment, and maybe that like that kind of like gap that you have to bridge between finishing being a student and maybe starting to get work, does that feel like it's a little bit further down the like road for you to kind of have to like approach those problems?
I feel like that, especially now since I got into the diploma program, I will definitely reach that point. And honestly, looking at it, I could tell myself that it's a huge way until then, but I also realized that if you really put in a lot of work, you can improve very fast, very quickly. And I've also heard that there haven't been really any people at Sin Studio that failed. So I also trust in the program, trust that with the proper guidance, I will reach a point. And for me, there's not really a lot of use in, denying myself that I will be able to do it, because it's just a matter of practice. And maybe, I'm a little bit slower or I'm a little bit faster than other people, but that doesn't really matter, right? Because it's more about, working until you get there. And if you really want it, then you will eventually get it.
That sounds great. Also, apologies if anyone hears my cat crying. There you go.
It's a classic. I have cats too, which are sometimes they transform into loud demons.
Yeah, this one is offended by every single closed door in their path. Hopefully they will calm down a little bit. I kind of want to follow up that question as well, maybe by asking like Clint or Diana, it's like that first kind of like 6-month period after you've decided it's time to start looking for work. For whatever reason you've hit your student deadline and it's time to start applying for work. Like, do you have advice for anyone who's about to start that, or finds himself in that position? Anything you learned whilst you were starting to look for work, basically?
Do you want me to give my answer?
Go ahead.
Well, one thing that I genuinely
wish that I had done, and I like to tell students just to be aware of, is that I really do think that it is a mistake to attempt to be a full-time freelancer at the beginning of your career. Unless you're living at home with your parents or with a partner that is, paying the bills. It's just not a good idea. And people who attempt this end up suffering a lot more than they need to, or having to rely on debt, which is a very bad place to be. Because you'll only be setting yourself up to have to pay for it later, right? And you don't want to be in that position. So, I did that, and I had help, but it really wasn't even the best decision for me, even though I could sustain it at the time. The best thing to do is kind of what we encouraged students to do when I was at Sin Studio, and they're still doing that now going forward, which is encouraging the graduates to seek out full-time work in a studio for a company, at least for a while. There have been exceptions. There was one exception, notably, it was Grady Frederick, who was one of our grads, and he did really well throughout the program. He was already getting freelance clients, so he was fine when he graduated because he already had those clients, those contacts. But for the most part, that's not the case. So, that's something that I would caution people to really be aware of, because it does take time to accumulate those clients. And for instance, Magic the Gathering is not accepting new people right now. They're not accepting applications right now. So they have a pool of people that they're working with. They have enough. Mm-hmm. And so if you're counting on getting in now, you're probably not going to get in now. It's going to be a while before they open up again, or before you make those contacts to get approached or get in, through a connection. So it's always better to secure a steady source of income when you're fresh out of school, because it can take a long time to get all those freelance clients and to get enough and to get into a work rhythm and get your workflow down to a degree where you can produce enough work that pays enough to pay your monthly bills, right? So that would be like really one critical thing that I do tell students. How about you?
Yeah, I'm on the same page with approaching it more like an adult. A child doesn't make a plan. If he wants to do something, he just jumps right in and he does it. And he doesn't really think it through before he does it. Well, in the real world, that doesn't work so well with your jobs. So having at least a part-time job, even if it's not in art, like we were chatting beforehand about, doing graphic design or some other thing, even if you're working part-time, or if you have a partner that's helping support you, because it's going to take a while. Mm-hmm. It isn't, for most people, a one day I'm a student, next day I'm fully employed artist. And even if that's the case, even if you do land a job in the field, it's probably going to take you a while to find that position and go through all the paperwork and go through all the interviews. But if you're doing it freelance, it's probably going to take longer. I know it took me over a year in order to make the full transition from doing graphic design full-time to doing illustration full-time. And I think that in a lot of cases, the rule of thumb is if you can make 40% or 50% of your normal income through this, whatever your new side thing is, in this case, it would be, freelance illustration, then that's a good show that you could probably make it support you. And so then that's where you could stop your other job and then devote all of your time to this new path. Otherwise, you're just bringing on more risk than is needed. And Diana was mentioning that there is a certain change of dynamic when you start to doing it professionally. Like all of a sudden, there's a difference between I can paint a picture well to I have to paint a picture well or I literally will not pay rent next month and I cannot buy dinner.
And I can't redo the picture endless times.
Yeah.
Or I won't make enough this month on pictures. You know what I mean? It's like you start having to factor in the time. And this is, not to shamelessly plug our school again, but this is part of why we're approaching our assignments and classes in a way where we're trying to help people develop a method to achieve predictable, reliable results and be able to estimate how long it's going to take them to do something so that they can plan out, okay, how many projects can I take on that I can finish in time, right? Part of being a professional, especially if you're doing freelance, is then you do have to budget your time, budget the projects. How much am I making per hour? Is it worth it? Would I be making more working at the gas station if I'm this slow at painting? Really, you have to think about all these things. Then it's not like being a student where I can get endless tries to improve a piece. When you're working on a schedule with a client and you have bills to pay, you can't afford that anymore. And that's why I would say it seems to me among successful artists that the freelance part really does come later in the career, not at the beginning. So people will see people like Evan Amundsen and all these other people doing freelance, or Chris Ron or whoever, and they'll be like, I want to do that. And it's like, well, a lot of these people didn't start off like that. Like Sakimi Chan was working in a studio before she became the highest paid artist on Patreon, right? Like these things generally don't start like that. You need time, a bit more time to build up your skills, to build up your look and know what you really want to do, and know the market and the audience and the client. And like that doesn't happen, and build a network, right? And that doesn't happen right at the beginning, fresh out of school. So I would just caution people not to think, oh, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to go freelance. It's like, great, if you've got 20 clients that know you and are willing to pay, consistently, go ahead. But if that's not the case, don't go down that road right away, because you'll end up just wasting time and you'll have to go into a studio eventually anyway.
I would like to quickly jump back to the point where you asked me if there's like a gap. I'm kind of worried to how I will kind of like close that gap. I think it's time efficiency, because I am not very good at working fast, and I understand that over time I will eventually just get faster no matter what. But as a professional, there might be like especially when you reach like crunch times, you might have to work very fast, right? And that's not so easy when you're not when you haven't like 100% honed your skills, right? So that's something I guess I will just need to figure out along the way, and it's probably something I guess you like start to explore different workflows and stuff, and then you kind of like slowly reach a point where you work faster.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we can figure out some ways where it isn't just you have to get it as you go along the job. Hopefully we can find some insights on that. And I have an incredibly limited experience with doing professional work, so I'd very happily have Clint and Diana like step in, or say their piece afterwards as well. But say on that note about time efficiency, one of the big differences is a point that you mentioned about being a student earlier, is it's better to do that like perfect rock every single time to make sure you're learning. But I found in a pipeline, when you're doing, say, ideations of rocks for an environment, they don't want your time to be spent doing perfect rocks. It still has to hit a certain quality, but you kind of find you kind of have to get over this idea of delivering kind of like perfect, or maybe even self-indulgent, like showmanship work for every single stage, because you're used to putting in as much time as you're allowed to use for homework or a project to put it in. But on a job, they actually kind of want you to go about the opposite way and be like, what's the minimum amount of time you can spend and still get us the design that we need? And it I think it requires quite a lot of confidence in your ability to know that you can make good work over and over and over again before you can kind of do that. And I mean, I don't know if Clint or Deanna have any tips on kind of either working on your efficiency, or if what I said actually rings true to their experience in like a professional environment.
Yeah, actually, this is part of discussions that Clint and I have had as well, as far as developing our educational material in that direction.
Yeah, a lot of it is students who are tackling things once in an illustration. They're not learning a method of how to paint the thing. They're literally just trying to learn it on the fly as they're illustrating the piece for the first time, and then they sort of just move on to the next piece. And again, it's a whole batch of new subjects. They're trying to learn them all from scratch. They've never gone through training that says, this is how you render a tree trunk. These are the core things that you need to get right for this to look like a passable tree trunk. But then you kind of need that on everything, right? You need to know what are the core things that you need to do for this jacket to look like a proper jacket on a professional level. And when you're just trying to figure everything out from the first time, every piece, you're not going to hit that. And so there's an issue there where I think it's a problem about how the student is approaching the piece. And it is also an issue where I think there is a gap in the teaching, where they're not teaching some of the right approaches, and it's forcing a lot of the new students to end up in this situation. Another thing is, of course, we see it all the time, which is students feeling a pressure to prioritize speed over quality. With the abundance of Instagram, sped up videos of speed paints and YouTube videos and just watching masters paint, they get the impression that they should be able to get it right the first time, every time, and do it very quickly. Otherwise, they're not keeping up with the crowd. And the fact that's just not true. A lot of artists, they just don't show you all the iterations and failed attempts and repaints and all this stuff that they go through to come up with their finals. And the first thing that you have to prioritize is your quality. Like, if you can't do the piece at the right level with unlimited time, you do not need to worry about trying to do it faster. Doing it faster is not going to somehow improve the quality. So at the beginning, really slowing down, allowing yourself to.
So that's really like illustration oriented. In terms of the concept art scenario that you're talking about, where they don't want things that are finished. This is true. They just want them drawn cleanly and understandably, presented well. I think a lot of concept art students are just trying to focus on too many directions at the same time. The thing is, like, if you want to make a nice concept page of things, of iterations, you want them to look good, it's much more important to focus on the drawing, on the line work, really, the lines and the flats and the design, than worrying about rendering. Rendering is like the least of your problems. And there are many great and very busy concept artists getting a lot of work that don't even render. It's just drawings and flats, drawings and flat colors, clean lines. And if you need to explain a texture, you can throw a picture, a photo texture on there and as a call out on the side and just explain this area is this texture. You don't even need to render it. Another thing, and this is another thing that we're going to be focusing on in some of the classes, some of the assignments, which is learning to break down complex things into more simple things, into like 4 steps. Okay, start with the sketch and take these 4 steps no matter what the subject, the item is, and it will achieve an okay, clean looking result. And a lot of the times people just end up noodling on things, on everything. And that's noodling does not allow you to guess or make an estimate of how long something's going to take to finish, because noodling is just 50 micro decisions in succession that may or may not work out, followed by another 50 decisions. So what we're looking at, what really improves efficiency, and we've seen this particularly from the Eastern schools, is breaking it down into the method and simplifying your steps. Don't worry about complexity, just focusing on what are the like 4 steps I can take on every single item from start to finish that will make it look professional and clean. Let's forget about overdoing it or making it artistic. What can I do to make it clean and professional in 4 steps? How can I break this down so that I don't end up spending hours noodling on this or that? And that's what we find is missing in a lot of educational programs and structures, is that reliable simplification approach, rather than, okay, you've seen the references, the reference images, now just incorporate all these different aspects of the references into your drawing and see what happens, kind of thing, right? So that's kind of what our thoughts are on that topic, and why so many students are struggling to know what to do. It's because they're not actually being given clear steps on what to do. They're just being told, okay, now do this way. We've seen a bunch of tutorials, people doing it all types of ways, and just kind of figure it out. And that doesn't produce efficiency. And then people are wondering, how can I get faster, right? It has to be broken down into more simple, digestible steps, reliable, methodical step. That's how you can speed it up. But you can't, like, getting fast at noodling or intuitive painting. It's like, yeah, you can if you spend, like we did, like 10 years on it, you can get okay with it. But we find that because of the way we learned, we didn't learn efficiency, right? We learned to hit the target eventually. Yeah. And we don't want to teach that. We don't want people to have to struggle that way when there is a better approach.
Yeah. 10 years for instant noodles.
Yeah.
Imagine that, huh?
Yeah. I mean, that's really useful to know. And I would agree that, that seems to be a common fear a lot of students have as they're like ending their education, is how do I keep up with these people, or how do I just hit a level where I can do this at this speed every single day. And I'd agree when you're saying break it down into those simpler elements. Sounds like a pretty common thing for improving teaching in general anyway, because that efficiency is like quite a vague word, is quite similar to like mileage or fundamentals. When someone can tell you to get more mileage or work on your fundamentals or work on your efficiency, but it's going to be a lot more useful if someone breaks down, well, efficiency is having 6 steps to rendering any material, and you just have to worry about certain properties or local values, or that it's not just about get efficient at rendering clothing or something.
I did want to mention, because we were talking about resources and I don't know who it was that said they had no experience with the business side of it or writing contracts or any of that stuff. There is a resource that no one really talks about, but I know about it from some years ago. It's on Gumroad, and it's called, if you Google it, it's called Art Business Boot Camp. And for like $50 you can get everything, but even for the just summary PDFs of all this information, it only costs like $3. So you can get a lot of the info for cheap, and that actually has a lot of excellent information for anyone that's freelancing or doing work independently. If you or anyone listening wants to check that out, it's not super well known, but it's there for people who want that information and don't know really where to look. Well, as an example, Adam, this is a funny thing. We at Sin Studio, we did I don't know if they're going to do it again this year. Maybe I'm not there, so I don't know. But with the last group, graduating group, we had a couple of artists come in and review their exit portfolios just shortly before they were about to graduate, right? So the exit portfolios were almost complete. So I think it was Zhang Xin from Bethesda, who came in, and Clint came in as well to review those portfolios. So the ones that were more, concept art, photorealism, AAA style, we gave to Jiang because it's more in his style, and the ones that were more illustrative came to Clint. And Clint was working for Blizzard at the time. And both Clint and Jiang told me afterwards that they had one-on-ones with all of the diploma students, and that they had good interactions with them and whatnot, but not one student, not a single one, asked them for a job or asked them if they were hiring or looking for anyone. None of them asked. They didn't seek out the opportunity. And I think that just goes to show that they were just overly timid. Like, one thing is being too aggressive, right? We don't encourage that. Obviously, that can be really off-putting to the other person. But if you are in a situation where you have that one time already, or you have a connection to someone already, it doesn't hurt to politely ask if there are any opportunities, if they have any advice, or if they think that your work would fit in with the project that they're working on, or something like that. And so often people just don't even ask because they don't think they're good enough, or they just maybe doesn't even occur to them. I don't know. But they let those opportunities pass them by. I mean, that's a window that was open for those people, and none of them took it, right? Nobody. And now it's like, when is the next time they're going to be in a room with Jiang Xin? I don't know. When's the next time they're going to be in a room with Clint? And Clint's no longer at Blizzard, right? So there's all these windows of opportunity. If it doesn't work out, you didn't lose anything by it, right? But if you don't even ask, then you gain nothing. So I'm just putting that out there that, for Laurenz or any of you guys that is in a situation where you're talking to someone already, and they're working at the place you want to work, you should take that opportunity to at least verbalize your interest and ask.
I think that's something that I can actually relate to, because I've had a situation where that applies. Because thinking back to when I took a class with Christian Robert de Massy, at the end of the class, we always had about 30 minutes where he gave us an assignment. We should do the assignment and send it in. And while we were drawing, he told us that we can give him work from us and feedback. And literally every single person in the class was just too shy to show their work. And I always showed my work. And at some point, I realized, that I'm actually putting in a lot of effort. And then that I'm also not consciously, but that I'm doing a lot for him to notice me. And at some point I thought, what if I just ask him if he mentors me? And then at some point I said, yeah, can you take a little bit of time after the class to talk with me? And I asked him if he would mentor me. And because I put in so much effort, he really noticed my motivation and that I really wanted to. And he said, you know what? I've never done any mentoring at all, but I'm going to do it with you.
Amazing. Yeah, that resonates. I have I'm actually currently doing a mentorship, and that's called Kenny Vertham, and he's always said every class is also a secret job interview. That's always a thing, because
that is 100% true, and we tell, and this is why, and I really don't think students understand the gravity of this. Is I always warned all the diploma students, the incoming diploma students at Sin Studio, be conscious of how you treat your teachers, because they will remember when they're disrespected, treated poorly, and like it or not, you can have whatever feelings you want about a teacher, but they're already in the industry, and if they've been there a long time, they probably have a solid network. They've been doing it a long time. I don't want to act like it's some kind of mafia, but you gain nothing by not presenting yourself well each and every time. You can only lose, and there's a lot to gain if you do present yourself well. Like Laurenz was saying, I mean, in our classes, we remember the students that cared, that did all the assignments. We remember their names. The other ones we don't.
Well, I mean, on the contrasting to what Laurenz said and what you're saying now, if the teacher recognizes that you're one that doesn't show up, that doesn't turn in solid work, like you don't want to be remembered for that either, because it might be some point in the future that's the art director that's looking at your stuff to see if you get hired.
It's more likely than you think. It's much more likely. And so whenever we have diploma students that end up getting into some kind of tense or uncomfortable situations with their teachers, they just don't like the teacher, they don't like their teaching method, they don't like the assignments or just the personality of the teachers, I always tell them, please do not verbalize that, because a lot of the times, the truth of the matter is you're going to be working in situations where you may not like your lead or your art director as a person, whatever. You don't need to like them. They're not there to be your bestie, right? They're there to do their job. You're there to do yours. And people have to start getting used to that when they're in class already, because it may occur. And even a person that you don't like may have something to teach you, right? They may know something that you don't know. And it's a shame to not be able to learn from them and take advantage of that, because you have some personal bias against the person. So what Laurenz is saying is absolutely true. And this in Sin Studio, that school in particular, it's a big part of it because a lot of the students there get hired by their teachers. This is just a fact. So the ones that impress their teachers and are easy to work with, easy to get along with, are going to get those jobs fresh out of school. And the ones that complain or don't show up for class or don't do the work or don't implement feedback, like I used to hear about it all the time. The teachers were just like, this person is a nightmare to work with. And my advice to students is you don't want that to be you, because it's only going to set you back. It's only going to make it take longer to reach your goal.
I remember reading an interview with Jeremy Jarvis. He's been in the industry for ages and ages. He was actually the art director that got me on board with Magic the Gathering originally, reviewed my stuff and signed me on to do work with him. And I remember he said in one interview that he would rather work with a slightly less talented artist that had a good attitude and was easy to work with than someone that was a little more talented but was just difficult to deal with. And so realize that, hey, if you're personable and you take feedback without, making a fuss, and you send things in on time, you don't even have to be the best, because somebody else could be better. But nobody wants to work with someone who's difficult, even if they're talented.
Or unreliable,
right? Maybe the person can do amazing work, but they don't ever send it in on time. They don't answer emails. They don't send updates. You can't run a company like that. You can't run a company with people that aren't reliable. So make sure that you're also paying attention to those other qualities. And, going back to, that starts with how are you working with your instructors? How are you working with your mentors? Or even how are you working with your classmates? Because they're going to be in the industry too.
Yeah, they're all your future co-workers and connections. And I guess I just wanted to kind of add a little bit on that, maybe just a personal take thing, because I think that's some of the most useful information people get about education and these guys being in the industry and your art directors and that, and trying to make sure that you're at least making a good impression or treating it as if it is an interview for a future job. Obviously you never want to be in a situation where someone's trying to leverage that against you, and it's not to just appease someone who's disagreeing with you. But I also agree that level of professionalism that you're talking about, of even if you have a personal grudge with someone, that's your that's your personal face. But when you're a student or working with someone, you have to find a way of being able to healthily compartmentalize that, so you can still show your ability, as an artist or as an asset to them in the future. But obviously you don't just want to be like people pleasing teachers and that as well.
No, I mean, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. I'm not saying
I don't think it came across like that.
If a teacher, someone you're working with is like openly hostile, toxic person,
Yeah.
maybe let the administration know, and maybe avoid that person in the future. I mean, there's obviously people in the industry I don't particularly care for, I wouldn't want to work with, but I don't make a fuss. I just avoid. Like, doesn't have to be anything more than that. So I mean, people have to pick their battles, right? And like it or not, when you're a student, the teachers do have the advantage if they're in the industry and not just full-time teachers. They do have the upper hand in the sense that they're already established, they've already proven themselves, they have nothing to prove. But the student needs that street cred still. The student needs they still have a way to go to prove themselves. So it's better not to, create problems where you don't need problems right at the beginning, and just avoid. But like I said, yeah, if someone's doing something really horrible or criminal or whatever, then by all means call that out. But we have to pick and choose when we start fires, and if it's really, really worth it in the long run. For sure. And then that's the thing, like, even you can be surprised, and some students have been surprised that even student or teachers they don't like have opened doors for them later on. Right? So it has happened more than once where a student is surprised that, oh, I didn't even like that teacher, but then he went out of his way for me later on.
It's not just handing in homework to finish a class kind of thing.
Well, the teachers do notice, like, the students that are interested, that are engaged, like Laurenz. Laurenz was in my classes, always asking questions, always like participating a lot. Even a simple thing like having his camera on to talk with me or with Clint, like those things are things we notice, just the engagement. Whereas the people that just seem like they didn't really care much, didn't make as much of an impression on us, of course. Like, and I don't want that to sound unfair, but if a student puts themselves in our position, who do we see? Who do we see participating or talking to us or handing in homework? Of course, those are the people we're going to notice.
I think that's something that I have felt a lot because, for example, I've taken a class where I've been pretty much the only person with my camera on. And I think it's a matter of respect, right? Because if I was sitting there as a teacher and I'm holding a class and not a single person is showing their face, it's not a good feeling for them if they're just talking into a black box. And something I've noticed over and over, that if you bring a lot of respect to a class, to a person, specifically to a teacher, you get a lot out of it. It's not about like specifically like crawling up the ass of the person. It's about just basic respect, right? And appreciating what the other person does for you. And the teachers, they will 100% notice. And I've felt this over and over, especially with, for example, the mentorship. I've taken the chance that the teacher was giving us as pretty much the only person in the class, and I've got a lot of value out of it. I mean, I ended up having a mentorship for free with an industry professional that is insanely good.
Yeah, I just want to say, Laurenz, that's really unusual. Most of them will not mentor you for free, so you got really lucky with Christian. And I also want to add just an exception for David and other people in the class whose internet was just way too spotty to have the camera on. Like, we understood that, and we don't have any problem with that. Totally understandable. But for most of the class, that wasn't the reason. They just didn't want to engage us to that degree, which made it harder for us to engage with them, right?
That's quite an interesting thing, being digital classes, you actually have that option. Whereas, previously, if it was a physical class, you wouldn't really turn up with a black box covering your face, the classroom, and things like that. So, yeah, that's always been an interesting one in online classes. I guess just mainly thanks so much for giving us so much of your time and lots of amazing insight. It's been great to hear from like all three of you. It's been like way more insightful than I could have hoped it would have turned out. I've learned loads talking to you guys. So I guess just if there was anything anybody wanted to like bring up or mention at the end or anything before we sign off, just say thanks.
Is there anything you want to mention?
Well, hey, I mean, we appreciate you taking the time to have us. And, really good questions. I think you brought up some really great points to discuss. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really appreciate the opportunity to kind of explore some of these topics and hear from some former students, like David and Laurenz. Wish we could have heard more from David as well. But hearing from Laurenz was really useful. And like for anyone listening, we really appreciate any feedback from students. I do routinely ask for it because it is super valuable to us when we're developing content material to know what are people taking away from this, what's working well for them, what do they feel is lacking or could be improved. Like that is really valuable to us. So anyone that wants to contact us with any kind of feedback or insights, we always welcome that.
I wanted to thank as well. I feel really honored to be here. I'm super glad we did this. It was a lot of fun and I got a lot of insights. And yeah, I really appreciate it. And I hope that we maybe get around to doing another episode at some point.
Oh yeah, definitely love to catch up with people, especially, it'd be really interesting to see where you are in some like a few months, a year's time or whatever, how it's developing for you. And, it sounds like Clint and Diana have a lot of projects that are going on. And as those, become reality in the future, it would be great to check in on those as well. Yeah, it's just been a ton of fun.